Ann Arbor's Talk Station, 1290 WLBY and the Lucy Ann Land Show. Damian on Design with Damian Farrell from Damian Farrell Design Group, where he is an extraordinary architect. And each week, bringing in elements of design into our show to learn why it's so important to our lives, no matter what we do. And Damian, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
It's perfect. We're doing this in the month of March. It's green. We're talking green today.
Yeah, the world finally is turning green.
Oh,
right?
that's true,
Let's
too.
Hope, right? And you and Dean are both building homes. I think this is very topical, and I think a lot of people I'm hearing questions about some of these definitions, some of these descriptions. So it's wonderful to have Doug Selby here from Meadowlark this morning. It's, when you work with Doug, it's pretty clear that he really gets geeked by this stuff.
How did this become a passion for you? Green building and solar and all of these different things we're talking about, net zero, off the grid, passive houses. We're going to find out what all of that means in a moment, but how did it start for Doug Selby?
Well, I used to be a chemist. I used to do pharmaceutical research, and then I did tissue research at the University of Michigan. So I do have a science background, and I'm just personally, one of those geeks that's into physics. Houses have a lot of physics going on in them, so as I transitioned to wanting to work more with my hands and more in the building industry, sort of the building science end of things really was a natural fit. And it's just so much fun to envision what's possible in homes, and then also to, sort of figure out the puzzle, so to speak, because there's a lot of moving parts in a home.
And can this be done either in a renovation fashion or in a brand new build?
Yes, it can. Obviously, new builds are easier to go to a deeper level and to start sort of with a blank slate, so to speak. But we do a lot of very deep green remodels as well. And certainly there are, 120 million homes in the United States, 99% of which could use a serious energy retrofit, I'm sure.
And even very subtle ones, as both Lucy Ann and Dean and I have all learned in our own homes. And, but I think that the key word here is science. I think we look at our building industry, most of us, and our clients, the average public, and the word science doesn't really come into it. It's building, right? It's 2x4s and drywall and some insulation and so on. But these terms of net zero, passive house, off the grid, are pushing to almost to the point of how can you build homes and how can you live and shelter, which really takes nothing out of the environment. So doesn't rely on fossil fuels in any way. Some of it does, but really minimizing stuff, right? Pushing it down and really finding the edges, and going all the way up to what can we get out of this thing? How can we absolutely pay the minimum to run stuff? And it's happening in commercial construction, not just residential, but residential is really, I think, at the forefront at these levels.
Well, what is the difference between all of these terms? Can we start with a definition for each of them?
That would be a good idea. Damian, you mentioned three there.
Well, to me, let's start with net zero. I think what the net zero focuses on is still continuing to use access to the grid, if you will, at the most basic form of definition, but doing things with your home or your building that enable you to minimize the use of that. So you really only use it when you absolutely need to, and what you're trying to do is actually feed the power and the power that you're generating. So whether it's from photovoltaic cells, for instance, putting that, or wind, if you have that opportunity, putting that back into the grid, and essentially kind of turning your meter backwards, if you will. All right, and then during those times when you do need it, you're leveling things out a little bit. In conjunction with that is a good deal of building science that has to do with envelope and insulation and so on. But when I look at the characteristics of those houses, I see houses that still have a lot of glass, a lot of openings. They are in many ways unrecognizable from everyday houses, if you will. And I say that because when we start to talk about passive houses, there is a distinct impact on the architecture and the design when you get to that level. So that's kind of my understanding of how net zero works. I'm using stuff, but I'm putting stuff back, and I'm hoping that at the end of the day, I'm netting out zero.
Okay, and
that's the intention.
And then off the grid is what? How is that different?
Off the grid then is trying to survive or surviving with wind, solar, passive heating and cooling, in other words, geothermal, drawing, in the summer months, the warmer months, drawing air through the building to provide comfort.
And then passive house, Doug?
Well, I really think that passive house is the you can build off the grid, you can build net zero. Many times people do this by just adding solar or wind or something that produces a lot of electricity. Passive house really looks at it from the supply side and saying, how can you build an envelope that uses the absolute minimum that is really possible for a building to use. In some ways, it's like living in a thermos bottle or something that's incredibly well air sealed and incredibly well insulated. And so if you never have to use that power in the first place, it gets a lot easier to get to a point where you're actually producing more energy than you're using in a home.
Give us some ideas of how one does this.
Well, really just incredibly tight construction. That means lots of adhesive tapes that go in every joint connection in a house. Really being obsessive about all the places where houses come together, which there are thousands of. And then also just making sure that you have a construction envelope that uses an extreme amount of insulation. So you're getting R value combined with air tightness, which combined really are what make a passive house act completely different than normal houses, to the point where they frequently need almost nothing for a heating and cooling system. So you can save all the cost of that ductwork and all those other things.
Wow.
Because you really just don't need hardly any heating and cooling equipment. I mean, a few toaster ovens can be the amount of energy that it really takes to
Very thick
equivalent
walls,
amount.
super insulation, super dense insulation, nothing that allows the transfer of air from inside to outside. So you're essentially grabbing your first load of air when you get the house done, and you're hanging on to it.
That's it.
Right? That's kind of the idea of it.
Sure, yeah. And of course, being a healthy home is very important too. So we do have lots of air exchange in them, but you're wringing every bit of energy that you can out of that air exchange too. So I would say that frequently a passive house will have better air quality than the average American home.
So what are you doing with windows and doors and that sort of, because you still want, a lot of us want to have the outside in.
And that psychological aspect of having a well-lit home with natural light and all those things is very important. I would say that, our goal is really to make houses that actually, that contribute more than they use to the grid, and maybe you're even powering your car with your house. But that at the same time, that you don't have to sacrifice any comfort or any natural light or anything like that. Now, a passive house would say, yes, windows are important. Let's place them strategically, and to make sure that they're triple pane glazing and all those things that make them extremely low energy use. And you can get incredible windows these days. They can do amazing things now. So I believe that that this is not about taking something away from people. It's actually about adding comfort and health and all those things into a home in a way that we never thought possible just even 10 years ago.
It sounds to me, though, that a passive house is a new house, a new build. But can you do it in a renovation?
I suppose you could at tremendous expense.
That's absolutely right.
What you're really doing is taking your existing walls, for example, and you're thickening them up.
Okay.
Probably 3 to 4 times the thickness of the walls we're accustomed to really get to those levels.
So is this going to be a standard in the building industry decades from now? I know people like Doug and you have been doing this, but is this something that's just going to be the norm, Doug, do you think?
I do think that, for instance, in Germany, you cannot do a renovation project. You cannot build a new wall on a house without meeting passive standards. In California, you're now starting to see the state pushing towards a goal of every new building being passive certified passive standards by 2030. As the cost of energy escalates over time, the cost of investing in your envelope comes down further and further and further.
So people that are thinking the government is forcing this kind of issue and it's going to cost more money for your house.
This is a purely economic consideration. At some point, I don't think the government's going to need to force it. Yeah. At some point, people are going to the cost of the investment is going to overwhelm, or the cost of energy is going to overwhelm the cost of investment.
Are we there yet?
We're pretty there.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people now absolutely grasp the concept. I have new technologies. I have new building science available to me that can reduce my monthly bill dramatically. And if I reduce my monthly bill dramatically, I can spend that money in other places or I can save that money.
That's right. I find it's about a 5 or a 6% investment rate return on your money, which is,
That's a pretty good rate of return.
pretty good rate of
Yeah.
return, especially when you get to live in a much better, more comfortable, more healthy house as a result, right?
Right.
Your
So the-
your life is improved.
The house that's sort of been credited as starting the movement of getting it going here in this country is a house that was built only in 2002 in Champaign, Urbana. And this is a woman by the name of Katrin Klingenberg who studied architecture in Germany. She discovered the passive house, which is Passivhaus, so really tracing those German roots, and endeavored to reintroduce this refined house principles to the United States by building her own passive house. And so it characterizes what I was talking about as far as the architecture and how, at the moment, the passive house, the dictates of the passive house, and I think that's a fair word to use, are generating an architecture where generally you want to be very careful with your south walls and how the sun impacts. So you want to keep direct sun off in the summertime. You want to let some of it in the wintertime, but good north light, because it's the soft light that is very easy to regulate and to manage. So, much more envelope, less window is kind of the characteristic of it, and very simple form, very simple shape. So there's some interesting design challenges ahead and opportunities, how to do that. So this is pretty new to us. This is only 13 years now.
Right.
That is true.
And Doug Selby, give some examples of what your work has been like here in Ann Arbor as well with Meadowlark Builders.
Well, I think just, kind of piggybacking on what Damian said is that, we are fortunate to live in one of the most highly educated communities in the United States, Ann Arbor, and I think that there's a natural resonance that's happened with this sort of building here, because people do tend to look further into the future here, and it's if you're looking at living in the same house 10, 15, 20 years out, it can and it should change your viewpoint on how that home should be built now, because changes that are those economic changes that we just talked about, they are happening, and if all you need to do is use the math that's available to us and run that out, and you can see how investing in a building envelope can really reap dividends for the life of the home.
Give us some examples of what you've worked on locally here.
Oh, well, gosh, I think we have at this point, 13 LEED Platinum certified homes, or either certified or in the process of it, both remodels and new builds. LEED certification has been a kind of a gold standard for green building for a while, but now Passive House and DOE Net Zero Ready, all these other certifications are starting to really become much more in the common dialect of people who are looking to build homes and things like that.
In fact, in my opinion, leapfrogged
Yeah,
over LEED.
I would say so too.
Yeah, I think LEED created a tremendous start, and it's continued to. We're on version 4 now, and it enables people who are trying to do something good with their buildings to really get into every level. So it categorizes so many different things that it makes it easier to understand all of the things you can pick and choose from to really impact your environment and impact your house and lower its impact, its footprint, if you will, in the environment. So I think LEED's going to stay, but I think what we're talking about today is what has leapfrogged past that, so the people who are looking for the superlative, looking for the ultimate.
And what does this do to the actual equipment you're using for heating and cooling in one
Great
of these
question.
homes?
Yeah, certainly. You can greatly downsize your equipment. It's not uncommon for us to double the size of a home, for instance, and end up using a smaller furnace than they started with.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, but that furnace will last a lot longer and it will work a lot better. And
Because it's not fighting the elements.
That's right. It's working with the building envelope in tandem. And I think that every client that we've ever had that's lived in this type of a home comments about how different it is to live in it. It's quiet. It's still. It has a sense of sort of peacefulness about it that is really, you can't kind of match. And when you drop something or you make a sound, you see that it's instantly muffled. And there's something about that even when you close the door, the air just doesn't move as much. And although you can feel that the air is fresh in the house too. It's a remarkable difference. And I've had a few people that have said, everyone should have the opportunity to live in this type of home. So, and I wish I could do more to my own home to make it like that.
And the solar aspect of this as well, talk about that.
Well, solar has just fallen incredibly in price and become more efficient at the same time. So, we're literally a third as much as for solar as we were 6-8 years ago.
A third?
1/3, and it's more efficient now. So it's really a reality that people can go net zero on their homes. You really have to obsessively do your building envelope, like, maybe not to passive house standards, but very good. And then you have to work on everything that uses energy in the home, your heating and cooling equipment, your hot water, all those things. But if you get there and really start chopping down on all those things that use energy, having a modest-sized solar array on the roof of your house can actually get you there now.
I know when we
Go ahead.
when we started building our home, you told me, Damian, make sure they wrap it right, which I didn't quite know what that meant until you went out and looked at it and you said they were wrapping it correctly. But that's part of this as well. I mean, just in general, there have been problems in the past. If that wasn't done well, then you had some problems. But now you're talking about even more kinds of attention put to the
Obsessive is a really good word to describe this, because you have to. I remember hearing a number of years ago that if you took all the openings in the average size house, a 3,000 square foot house, and you added them all up, it amounted to a 4 foot by 4 foot hole in a wall in your house.
Oh my gosh.
So in other words, I'm talking about the cracks under the doors,
right,
where French doors don't meet, that kind of stuff, windows that don't seal properly, places where insulation has fallen down in the walls and left you with your siding on the outside and your drywall on the inside, separating you from the. So if you think about it in terms of that, and imagine that, and then you think your furnace working up against that. So you have to go to that level of obsession.
Next week on the show, on Damian on Design with Damian Farrell, Doug Selby is going to join us again from Meadowlark Builders, and he's actually going to walk us through this of how we can do this in our own home. So looking forward to that, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look forward to next week.
All right. More coming up on the Lucy Ann Lance Show, Ann Arbor's Talk Station, 1290 WLBY.